So from all subsidy in Nigeria to sustainable development, sustainable development has been defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Achieving this has been largely connected to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. But how are corporates in Nigeria keying into this? We have a chair in sustainable finance and governance at European University Institute, Professor Kenneth Amaechi, joining us from Owerri, Imo State capital. Good morning, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good to have you, Prof. So we see, we hear of droughts, disturbing crops in Turkey, extreme weather in Europe, shrinking water levels in Germany, flood in Nigeria. How connected is this to sustainable development?
Yeah, sustainable development is a very broad agenda, as you'd imagine. So you have the environmental side of things, you have the social, you also have the governance. So the climate issues you mentioned or the environmental issues will come under the broad perspective of environmental sustainability. So yes, they apply to the sustainable development goals.
So when we say sustainable development and corporate, what role do they have to play? Because we hear now it's not just about environment, it's about corporates putting this into their plan, into their development, into their operations, you know, because they can also be adversely affected by some of these impacts that we see.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to move back and then ask ourselves what is the purpose of the Sustainable Development Goals? So the goals are about a progressive development, progressive agenda, which says leave no one behind. So it's also about inclusive development. So in that regard, it's kind of looking at the different challenges the world is facing today. And the SDGs have found a way to put them together. So, and if you put all those problems or challenges together, what they suggest is that they are very complex. So they will require multiple actors to deal with. So governments alone can't deal with these goals and challenges. Neither would it be possible for a civil society alone to do so. So in that regard, it requires what we may describe as collaborative governance. And collaborative governance here means that we need the different actors, government, civil society, and businesses to be part of the solution. So that's how the corporates come into it. So businesses exist in society, they need to contribute beyond the value they add to production. They also need to contribute to a better world, a better environment. And that's why and how the private sector is required to participate in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals.
How receptive can we say that Nigeria's corporates have been, you know, to this SDGs and sustainable development? How receptive have you noticed?
It depends on how you frame it, and I would say it is a journey, and it's one that started far back in the early 2000s, where we are looking at CSR, corporate social responsibility. Then you would imagine that people had things like philanthropy, right? Philanthropy is still there today, but we have moved away, or we moved all the way from philanthropy to corporate citizenship. Today, people are talking about corporate sustainability, and even the idea of ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors involved. So the point is that companies in Nigeria are warming up to it. They are connecting, but again, it depends on the language used. So how it is framed also matters. There are companies who are still struggling with the idea of corporate philanthropy on one hand and corporate sustainability on the other hand. So I think I will see it more as a spectrum, and different companies are at different stages on this journey. So some connect to it, some are still struggling with it. But one thing that is important, or one thing we have noticed through research, is that companies that are very much exposed to the global trends, companies that interact with the global world, are likely to be much more interested in the sustainability agenda. So in that case, it depends on where you are on the value chain. And also where you are in terms of your understanding of the sustainability journey. So in a nutshell, I would say companies in Nigeria are responding to it, but not as much as you want them to do. Want them to do more, but they're still making progress.
So what do they lose by not connecting to this sustainable development?
You can look at sustainable development goals from different perspectives. And what I've advised companies to do is to move away from the idea of sustainability as an add-on, something we do after we have done our strategy, something we do as an afterthought. So see sustainability as a space for innovation, as a space for creativity, as a space for opportunities. But even if you don't want to see it from that perspective, the other view is to see it as a space for risk management. If you are, say, for example, an oil and gas company, you should also be thinking about the potential risks and also what investors are saying about the sector in terms of the environmental impact and also in terms of the overall climatic or climate change impacts of oil and gas or fossil fuel. So the companies that see that as a risk can begin to prepare themselves for a future that is greener and a future that is more into renewable. So that's one way to look at it. So, and the other way is to have an integrated approach. Let it be a lens through which you see a strategy, a lens through which you implement, as opposed to something that you consider after you have constructed this grand strategy. So sustainability in itself should be a strategy, it should be a lens through which corporations can achieve their performance. Because corporates are very much interested in profit, they're very much interested in performance. Then the question is, how can sustainability be that route or route through which you qualify your performance or your success? And the more integrated it is, the more successful you will be, the more resilient you will be as well, because sustainability is about adaptability and working with the times as opposed to working contrary to it.
Yeah, I guess another message we could also preach along that line would be, if you don't practice it, then your existence in the future is threatened, because resources will keep depleting and you may not even have raw materials for existence tomorrow.
Exactly, that's the point. That's where the risk management part of it comes in. So think about your sustainability, being there in the long term, because that's also the other aspects of sustainability that is often mentioned. But in order to be there in the long term, you need to adjust, you need to adapt to the current reality, and also to align yourself with the global trend or the future trend. So in that regard, so what you want to do is also make sure that you are taking into consideration your risk. I'll give you an example, if you have the time. Think of say you're a bank and you have like 700 branches across Nigeria. A typical bank in Nigeria might be spending about 1 million naira on diesel as we speak, or even much more, given that the price of diesel has gone up. So imagine that you have about 600 branches across Nigeria and you spend 1 million naira on diesel every month. So basically you're spending 600 million naira on a monthly basis. And if you project it over a 12-month period, you're spending 7.2 billion just buying diesel, pouring it into your generator and burning it. So over a 10-year period, you're looking at 72 billion naira. If you're an investor, you'll be worried about that company, for example, but it also provides an opportunity for a company to save money through alternative sources of energy. So sustainability thinking in that regard helps you to rethink what we may see as a conventional everyday practice. So it's as basic as that, and that's why we are saying companies should see it as a space for innovation, a space that would enable them manage risk, and a space that will also enable them to enhance their performance. Sustainability is performance, and it's not contrary to it.
Yeah, but Prof, it seems at this time that the implementation of this sustainable development is left to be voluntary. So you see corporates decide if they want to do it or not, but eventually the consequences affect everyone, including even those who are not in the corporates. You know, so how can we make this become more compelling or get their buy-in even more? Because, I mean, the example you gave, for instance, yes, you're talking about the cost, but we can also look at the health. You know, burning of that generator into the atmosphere affects everyone who uses that area. We talk about climate change. We talk about what it's doing to the atmosphere and all of that. So how can we make it more urgent, a message for corporates to embrace?
Yeah, I think one way to look at it is to think of corporate sustainability as management of impacts. And corporate impacts can be both positive and negative. So to the average person or layman or lay person on the street, I would say sustainability is simply about reducing your negative impact and enhancing your positive impact. And corporations understand their negative impact. They also understand their positive impact. But what are they doing about the negative impact in particular? And you've already alluded to those, say, for example, environmental impact that may have a knock-on effect on health, air quality, for example. So, but the question now is, how do you govern, that the management of negative impact, which brings in, again, the point I made earlier about collaborative governance. Not everything can be handled by strictly government regulation, but there is a place for government regulation. But government regulation doesn't always need to be draconian. Government can also create incentives. Say, for example, companies might not be investing in renewable energy today, but what policies, what incentives can the government provide to enable funds to go into the right places that will be good for the environment and for our health in particular? So the point there is that there's always this tension: do we go voluntary or do we use regulation? I would say it would be a combination of both. Sometimes also companies want to do it voluntarily because they want to kick the can or the ball into the long grass. So that's a kind of an escapist strategy. But if you're thinking about sustainable development, that is about inclusion, that where no one is left behind, then we need to go towards collaborative governance, where we have a combination of hard regulation, soft regulation, and voluntary compliance.
Yeah, well, I guess if we want to follow that compliance, we also have to see what the government itself is doing. Is the government even conscious of it, to even start with? Because that's where most of the regulation will come from.
That's a fair point. I remember doing a piece about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was asking whether financial regulators in Nigeria are ready for sustainability. Because you can't ask companies to do what you can't do. That's hypocrisy. So government institutions, government regulators, they also need to imbibe the spirit of sustainability. So if you go to our government offices today, to what extent can you hand on heart say that they're following the principles of sustainability? But what is also happening, which is also positive if you look at it from that perspective, is that we have the office of I think at the presidency, there is an office that is into sustainability and the sustainable development goals. I can also see that in different states in Nigeria, you have the SDG offices. So it's been nice to see what these offices are doing and how they are helping to mainstream sustainability thinking and practice into government. I think that's the bit that is missing at the moment. We focus so much on sustainability in the private sector and amongst NGOs, but we hardly talk about that in the government circle. So it'd be nice to see how governments as organizations are also practicing sustainability, because you can't ask companies to do what they can do. That's simply bizarre.
Exactly. That's a very good observation about the SDG office. Even from the federal to the sub-national, we do have them. It would be nice to know exactly what they're doing and what agenda they are pushing, or what they are practicing, actually, before we expect the private sector to embrace this into their operations.
Yes, that's a fair point. But another aspect I think we are missing is also the change, the management, the mindset approach, where sustainability needs to be embedded in our curriculum, or curricula, as depending on how you look at it, from primary school, kindergarten to university. Again, the universities are missing in this conversation. It would be nice to see what NUC, in particular, National University Commission, is doing. It would be nice to see what the Ministry of Education is doing and how the Ministry of Education is using our schools to mainstream sustainability. Sustainability shouldn't be an afterthought. So in many countries we would like to emulate, they have found ways to embed sustainability in their curricula. So it'd be nice, again, in our own context. And if sustainability is to become a way of life, a culture, so to speak, then there is a place for education in that. And our educational system should be able to plug in that gap, especially the higher education institution. It'd be nice to see exactly what universities are doing in relation to their carbon footprint, in relation to inclusion, in relation to equity, in relation to corruption, and the like, as you would find in some other countries that would like to emulate.
What about individuals, Prof? What are some of the responsibilities of individuals in all of this?
I mean, it's a multi-layered approach here. So I know sometimes when I engage with corporates and we talk about sustainability, and then people tend to say, well, it can also speak to me in my home, bring it down to the household level. even how we separate waste, right? How we use electricity. How many of us leave the room and switch off the light? You may say, well, I don't have electricity then to think about switching off the light. But if you leave it on, then you are impacting on the environment. Think about plastics. How much plastic do we consume? Where do we dump or drop these plastics? If I want to buy a piece of tie, do I ask questions about where it's come from? So there's a role for individuals as well in terms of in terms of how individuals can be part of the solution. Well, I think we also need to go back to the point I made earlier about incentives. What incentives do we create for individuals to participate? You walk into certain companies today, into their buildings. If you leave the room, because they have sensors, the lights will go off. So we need to also make sustainability or the sustainability practice and mindset and culture easy for people, so that people don't go about with this guilt feeling that they are not sustainable. Once people begin to feel some level of guilt about sustainability, they're going to switch off. So the whole idea is to find a way to make it as inclusive as possible, carry people along, but make it easy for them. So yes, I agree there's a role for individuals, but that role will need to come from more awareness and also more incentives to enable this sort of shift and change we would like to see.
Yeah, but Prof, you know, when you talk about waste, I would say at least in Lagos, where we are, there's been a lot of messages about what waste, indiscriminate dumping of waste is doing to our waterways and how it's affecting us whenever it rains, all the flood that we see. This message has been preached for years. If not in any other place, I know in Lagos State, but it seems not to be sipping down, you know, to the mind of you still see a lot of people who look sophisticated eat in their car and throw it off, you know, on the road, you know. So I don't know how we're going to get this message down to people's minds.
I don't know, can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Prof?
Yeah, I can hear you. And talk about sustainability and IT systems.
I was talking about
this kind of a classic example of it. So the point you made is correct about individuals and what they can do, but you can also think about, you know, so again, goes back to the culture we talked about. If we have to be aware of life, people need to have the awareness. People need to understand what their everyday practices are having implications on sustainability at a societal level. So without that connection, it makes it difficult. But the other key point is that sustainability is also about discipline. And the ability to withhold ourselves, to change the way we do things. And say, for example, if I have a bottle of plastic, I should not throw it out of my car window. So you see that happening in Lagos. Why should someone do that? So it requires that awareness, as I mentioned, but it also requires a level of discipline. And a disciplined mind can make sustainability easy for everyone. So yes, there is a place for individuals, but I also believe that we need to see sustainability as a system-level change that would require us thinking through the different paths, knowing that individuals are only elements within that broader system. They will need incentives, and these incentives will need to also reinforce the interaction between individuals and others. So it's much more complex than it appears to present. But I think, again, going back to our educational system, going back to compliance as well as to regulation, might be different ways to make this work. But sustainability is a complex issue, and the world globally, I mean, we are grappling with it, and hopefully we make progress before 2030.
All right, Professor Kenneth Amaechi, Chair Sustainable Finance and Governance at European University Institute. Thank you so much for your time this morning.